So the only thing my parents ever, I feel, did right as far as raising my brother and I was teach us that you don't discuss politics or religion. It kind of went with their generation, and I don't know if that was something, those are two topics that they went along with as far as not discussing because they neither one of them probably understood politics, and I know neither one of them had a religion per se. So we avoided those topics. I knew I grew up in a conservative home. I knew they were fairly conservative or erred on the side of being conservative. And our school, the town where we grew up, was fairly conservative as well. And my brother went on to go to a Catholic university, and he remained, if not, became a little bit more conservative in his political beliefs. And I, of course, went to a liberal arts school and came out extremely influenced by the liberal side and came out, but then ended up in teaching. And that kind of changed my sort of political thoughts and beliefs and understanding, if you will. But I would argue with myself. And I certainly didn't need to discuss politics with anybody else. I had a hard enough time winning and losing the arguments that I had, literally with myself. And as far as religion went, I that was another thing I argued with myself about because I had so many different circumstances where I would question whether or not there was a God, or yes, there's got to be a God, or oh my gosh, I can't go through life without believing in something. But it was enough of an argument where, again, I felt like my thoughts and beliefs, I felt strongly enough about them. And when I got to a comfortable place, I was comfortable with my beliefs and I didn't need to discuss them or get anybody's input. It was fine. Now, as far as politics go, I don't like the discussion. I don't like the argument. And like I said, I argued with myself enough to not need to argue with anybody else. And nor did I care about most people's opinion but my own. I'm Nikki Lynn Chase, and this is my podcast, Adult Chicken. And it's not about religion or politics, it's about navigating life's unexpected as a single mom to two special needs kids. Now, enter religion as much as now I'm just going to bring in the hypocrisy right up front here with this episode that enter religion when I was going to family skate camp, and I think it was divine intervention when I woke up the day before we were off to family skate camp with a ginormous ankle. I had injured my ankle a couple of times skateboarding, as well as rolling it a couple of times as well, running. And I woke up the day before skate camp and hadn't done anything that I remembered other than the few times I'd injured it. But out of the blue, it just was swollen. It was huge. And I literally did think to myself, this is divine intervention. I'm not supposed to skate at family skate camp, even though that's where I was going to learn all my new epic tricks and come back just a complete and total professional. So I get to skate camp with the kids, and I saw an athletic trainer, and I said, what do you think? And she said, I don't think it's broken. I think you've probably got some ligament or tendon damage, and I think in this case it's probably motion is lotion. That's all I wanted to hear, was that I was supposed to keep moving. So I continued over the weekend doing probably exactly what I wasn't supposed to do, and I skated the whole entire time, and it hurt. It hurt like hell, but I enjoyed every minute I was at skate camp. But I was in a lot of pain, and by the time I got home, it had only gotten more swollen. So it was finally time to make an appointment, and I went to see my doctor. And it was a doctor, he'd done a couple of surgeries in my past on my feet. And when I got to see him, he took x-rays, and sure enough, I had a fracture and it had chipped a bone, but he really downplayed it. He said, I'm going to put you in a boot and let's just revisit this again in a few weeks. And I went along with it. He'd done a great job on both of my surgeries in the past, and I just kind of trusted him, believed what we were doing, and he always sent me to PT, which I found to be very helpful for some other foot injuries. So PT and wear a boot. So I went another time, a few weeks later, I return, and he's like, is the boot working? Well, yeah, it is. Okay, let's just keep the boot on. I'll see you in another 3 weeks. And I left without having the opportunity to go, can we look at this? Like the thing's swollen. And you said it was a fracture and a chip. And how is a boot going to fix that? I mean, is it going to reattach itself? I don't know. Like, I've not broken too many bones. I mean, yeah, the boot helps because the ankle doesn't move. And so I was getting really frustrated and I was rehearsing my next visit with this particular doctor. And I was starting to get angry because I couldn't do anything. And as the temperatures were rising, I'm like, I don't want to be in an ankle warmer boot for the whole entire summer. Like, the hell's the exit plan here? So I'd rehearsed how I was going to go in, how I was going to demand that we figure out what we're going to do to get me out of this boot and back to running and back to skating. And we happened to Sandler. My son is very into cars. And it was a weekend day, and I was on my way to, full disclosure, McDonald's, because I do feed my kids McDonald's. I love McDonald's. And there happened to be this big production, a big Ferrari show, and he loves Ferraris. And I don't know where he got it. I don't know how he has this affection for cars, but he loves them. So I pull over and we go to the Ferrari show. And we're just loving it. He's enjoying every minute. We've all picked out our Ferraris. And Sandler, of course, had picked out each and every one that he wanted in our fleet of cars we'll never have. And we had an awesome day. And that following week was my doctor's appointment. And remember, this doctor had just discounted every visit I'd been and had not addressed anything. I walk in and he says, "Did I see you at the Ferrari show with your kids and your boot?" And I said, You did indeed. Yes, I was at a Ferrari show." And I'll be damned. He pulled those x-rays back up and he said, "You know what? I want you to have a second opinion with my partner." And all I kept thinking was, holy shit, I had no idea what a Ferrari could do for a person. All of a sudden, I was getting special attention. I was just on my way to McDonald's. I wasn't on my way to get a Ferrari. But man, what a Ferrari can do for a woman. So he got me in to see the ankle guy. And the ankle guy took one look at my x-ray, looked at me and was like, "Why haven't we scheduled your surgery? You've got to have surgery done on this." I said, "Ask your buddy." I don't know. It wasn't until he found us at the Ferrari show that we were going to address the fact that something needs to be done. Like, I'm not making this up. If you look at the ankle, it's about 3 times the size of the other one. Something's seriously wrong. So then everything is so backed up in the medical world. So I was going to be in this boot for a lot longer, and they weren't going to do my surgery until July 27th, which got moved up, thank God. And I had to rush and go get all of my pre-op stuff. It will be in a couple of days. And so I had to, last week, get all of my pre-op stuff done. I had a good laugh because I had to go in, get a physical, of course, for surgery's sake, and get an EKG, get chest x-rays, and then they told me I needed a pregnancy test. And I had a good laugh about that. So I go in and I explain that to my GP. I say, "Look, I need an EKG, I need chest x-rays, and I need a pregnancy test. I think I'm in good company." And I explain, unless we're all on board, again, enter in the hypocrisy here, because I said this podcast is not about religion or politics. But unless we all believe in immaculate conception, I think I know the answer to the pregnancy test, but it's a must. I must have it before surgery. So the doctor says, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'll be 49 in August." And he bursts out laughing. I was kind of offended. I thought, it's okay for me to joke about it being immaculate conception, but stranger things have happened. I'm not that old. Like, come on, man. And the other concerning thing was, I thought, you've got a clipboard. Like, certainly, at least you can do the math, right? Like, and figure out how old I am. But he just wouldn't stop laughing about how old I was. And that I had to have a pregnancy test. He goes, "Well, we'll do it." And I'm like, Thanks. So the receptionist told me I needed to wait to find out the results of my pregnancy test and I would have to sit in the waiting room. And so I did just that. And I joked with her and said, you know, this is going to be a really awkward phone call to God if I'm surprised with the results. And so as I sat there, and it took some time. I reflected on the different times I had in my life where I was awaiting a pregnancy test, and many of the times I was anxiously awaiting. I had a hard time conceiving, and I had also miscarried many times, and so there were so many different events that had to do with pregnancy tests where it either gave me like a nervous, excited, or just straight up nervous, like where I was crossing my fingers and toes, eyes and nose that I wasn't pregnant. And I thought back to a rendezvous I had had a couple years ago where I hadn't been responsible and I had to go to the grocery store and get the what's called the Plan B pill, or as I call it, the irresponsible sex pill. And I went to the store and I didn't really have to get any groceries, but I specifically picked a grocery store where the pharmacy's in the back. I thought I'll just go back there and grab it and no one will notice. And if I see anybody, I'll just grab some groceries on the way out. And the lady at the pharmacy said, no, they're not here. You need to, they're over there. They're over the counter, but it's in the it's in the clear security box. And I was like, oh, awesome. Like the security box is as big as a cereal box. Let me just air to the whole entire grocery store that I had irresponsible sex. And I'm carrying it around, and I thought I'll grab some tortillas, anything large enough to kind of cover up what I'm carrying around. And I get to the checkout place, and the checkout person can't open the security box. So she calls over for some help. It was like something from a movie. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. And then asks if I want a bag. And I said, at this point, I'm pretty sure the whole store knows I had irresponsible sex. Thank you. I'm out. Well, I also then thought about a few other times in my life where it wasn't as funny or it wasn't funny at all. And there was a time when I was separated from my kid's father. Sandler was not born at the time. I just had Bootsy. And it had gotten extremely contentious. He was having rendezvous of his own, many of them. And he was just an angry, awful person. And he was actually, again, we're in a small town, and it had kind of circulated that he was living with a gal that he'd met. He had gone on a bachelor party and forgotten to come home, and he'd met, let me put this nicely, an exotic dancer. A fancy dancer in Tampa, and then he had moved her out to the town. It was a very weird time, and our marriage was weird, but the whole thing was just awful and yucky. And we had had an evening where we were completely separated. I was filing for divorce, and I was in the works. It was kind of in the early stages of trying to obtain a restraining order. It was contentious. It was nuts. And we had decided to go out kind of, it was for Bootsy's sake. She was about 2 at the time. And prior to that, many things had occurred that I didn't want to be part of. Hence, I was getting a divorce. Obviously, the fact that he was shacked up with a stripper from Florida or housing one. I don't even know how to word it or put it, but that was going on. But also, it had gotten very emotionally and physically violent. And the last straw was he had poured beer all over Bootsy and called her a retard. And I thought, no more, no more. But I still wanted to do the right thing, and I was ashamed. I was ashamed of everything, and I didn't know what the right thing was to do. So we had planned to go out for an evening, and we went bowling. And we, I think, both overserved ourselves, and we got to the evening's ending, and there was a non-consensual situation that happened. Now, I was technically married to the guy at the time, and I had a child with him, and um, but I hated him. I hated my. It was a very, very. I was ashamed of everything that went with it, and so essentially, I end up finding out I'm pregnant, and this baby is going to be a product, or is a product, of non-consensual sex. But yet the conflicted aspect of, I already have a kid with this man, and there were just so many things, and I was so ashamed, and I blamed myself for all of it, every ounce of it. I put the blame on myself, and I even took myself to another town because I needed to terminate it. I didn't want it, and I didn't want, our town was so small that we lived in. I knew the people that worked in the doctor's office, and I just didn't want anybody to know. And so I had taken myself to another town and didn't give too much of the story, but just explained what I wanted to do. And they came back, and I don't know if it was because I was so emotional or what it had. What the reasoning was, but they said that it was too soon. And I had done my research. I knew what I needed to have done and how it could be done. And it was soon enough that it was the easiest route. And they said, we can't do it. And so I immediately got home and I called my doctor and I said, this can't wait. I'm sorry. And I just explained everything. And she said, come in. And she said, Nikki, it's not a viable pregnancy. There's no heartbeat. There's nothing, and we can. It's inevitable. You'll miscarry. I have no idea how long it will take, and your body's going to continue to respond to the pregnancy for as long as you are pregnant. But there is no heartbeat. This is not a viable pregnancy. And she said, we have another option. If you want, I can give you the pill. I hate to even ever say the word, the abortion pill. I can give you that. And of course, that's out of pocket and you can pay for that, but it will, sort of expedite the process. And I was sold on that. And I thought, oh my gosh, in a way, there was this relief of I didn't have to carry that guilt anymore because I would have felt guilty and horrible forever. I didn't believe, and I don't believe in using abortion as birth control. But I also don't believe that if it's a contentious, horrible, terrible situation, I don't necessarily believe anybody should bring a baby into that. I knew I couldn't bring a baby into this world under those conditions and going through what I was going through at the time, nor could I carry the baby to term and not keep it. Selfishly, that wasn't something I feel like I had in me, especially after having my first baby, who was Bootsy, who was 2 at the time. So I took that option, and I was eternally grateful for that option. And I remained very upset with myself, very disgusted. I let it get there. But then I also was isolated because I didn't tell anybody the truth. Nobody knew that story. I was very quiet about it. I was very quiet about everything that was going on in our marriage. I was People that I was close to knew I had filed for a divorce and I was trying to get a restraining order, but he was controlling and it was scary and I was controlled. Back then it was flip phones, and every time things would get out of hand, he'd break a phone and then he'd break them in half and throw them in a body of water. He would cut up my driver's license. If we were on a vacation, he'd cut up my driver's license, so I'd have a hell of a time getting back home from wherever it was we were traveling. And he would make sure I didn't have access to money. And this all went on during this whole process of the divorce. And then we got to a place where we got to mediation, actually. And my attorney was even sort of manipulated by him as well. And we ended up back together. And then we had Sandler. And, that was part of why I didn't tell anybody I was pregnant again. People who knew I had already tried or attempted divorce once. It was ludicrous. It was crazy. And I was in a bad place. And of course, then I had Sandler. And then once everything went really south, we left. And the odd thing is, not one of those experiences, not the time I had to terminate pregnancy, not the time I even had to think about what I had gotten myself into during that very short pregnancy. I didn't have any regrets. I was lucky that I was gifted the freedom of not being guilty for having to terminate a pregnancy, that it was not viable. But I don't have any regrets. I am glad I had both of my children. I'm glad they are who they are, and they wouldn't be who they are had I not procreated with who I procreated with, and we wouldn't have left and we wouldn't have turned our lives around. But what I'm most grateful for is I did have the choice. And this is something that's it's been brought to my attention again by my therapist, because I always say, well, I didn't have a choice. I was the only parent that was willing to take these kids and roll with it. And he goes, you did have a choice. You could have balled up, you could have curled up in a ball in the fetal position and, turn to drugs, turn to alcohol like your parent, like your mom. And my therapist is absolutely right. I did make the choice to be a mom, and I've made all of my choices in the last 19 years to be a mom and the best mom that I can be. I also had the luxury of having the choice to proceed with the non-viable pregnancy. I had the choice to proceed with having a child who I knew was going to have a diagnosis and disabilities and potentially a laundry list of special needs. I'm just eternally grateful I'm on that side of time and that I had the choices that I had and could make the decisions I made based on my freedom to make the choices that I did. And it's very, I mean, who would have thunk that having pre-op visits would have been so thought-provoking. I mean, it's just for ankle surgery for a skateboarding injury that I was deemed worthy of having once I was spotted at a Ferrari show. I mean, who would have thunk that would result in me needing a pregnancy test, which would have caused me to sit and have time with myself and reflect on the fact that I had made so many choices in regard to my own health and the future of my children. And again, the irony of it being the day before I find out, and the whole United States finds out that history has completely been altered, and it's shocking. It's very strange. Of course, I immediately, the following day after I'd had my trip down memory lane of all the choices I had made and had the ability to make in my past, I immediately went to the future of my 19-year-old daughter. And that's been something, of course, that's been on my mind since she was a baby. And I thought, here I have this vulnerable little girl. And when I came to find out about her diagnosis and the fact that she was extremely vulnerable and was forever going to be vulnerable, and not the kind of person that has the capacity or the ability to make the choices for herself, but to know that my choices as her mom, and those choices that she relies on me making will be affected by ultimately what the United States changed. But for my daughter, I will just continue to be her number one advocate, her number one protector, continue keeping her out of harm's way. And so we don't have to cross the bridge where I'm at a point where a choice should be able to be made by me, but I might not have the ability. I'll just continue trying to avoid being in that kind of predicament. But it's a scary nonetheless. And boy, again, very ironic that the timing happened when it did.
Today, especially edition. My mama getting surgery tomorrow, Wednesday. So yeah, I will hold enjoy sleeping and enjoy the recovery room, and maybe she might get some crackers and and a popsicle. And yeah, I'm Sandal Chase, and I will see you next on Mother's Day next year. You have a good day. Don't worry, and everything's gonna be happy and enjoyable. Just make it a great day. Love you, peeps. Bye. Next time I will be on the show for Mother's Day. Bye.
Yeah, but Mother's Day's not for
Oh.
here.
Say what?
I'm Lucy, and I just want my mom to be a speedy recovery from Gemini and be dope.
Please stay tuned. Next week, I will go back to the subject I thought I was going to cover this week, which would be my pseudo relatives and some of my real relatives. I didn't have very many, and the ones I did have were extremely colorful. So I will tell you all about them, and also, of course, the ones I wish I had that I ended up naming my children after. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. You can find me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Adult Chicken. You can also find me on YouTube, Adult Chicken, as well as adultchicken.com. Don't forget the .com, and adult_chicken for both Instagram and TikTok.